Welcome to the Future of Finance interviews. Today, Dominic Hobson will interview Sam Seaton, the Managing Director of Moneyhub.
Hello, Sam. Thanks for joining us to talk about open data and its impact on not just financial services, but the economy as a whole. Could we begin just by you giving us an idea of why data is such a powerful tool in the hands of consumers?
So I could probably answer this by just saying that I think data is not to be underestimated, and it is genuinely transformational. And I'm going to use an example. You've only got to look at what Google Maps has done, and that is data. For me, it means that we can go to London and have dinner, and my husband and I are still talking when we get there, because it's no longer me with the A to Z trying to tell him where to go and him ignoring me. It just follows the maps. But on top of that, you just think about how real time it is. You can avoid the motorways and not get stuck on the motorway anymore because you can go the back way now because And I think we just forget how powerful data is, and I think you also take it for granted. So I think electricity powers everything we do. So does data. So with that background, open banking has kicked that off. And if anyone out there thinks that it's not going to transform our financial lives, think again. Just think back to some of the things that's already been transformed through data.
Can you give us some examples of how you think putting data in the hands of consumers will force incumbent established businesses to start innovating, to cut their prices, to ultimately personalise the offerings they have to people, consumers?
So I think the big thing we have to understand about data is that when you surface data, you in effect shine a spotlight on where the value isn't being added in that chain. So whenever you have anything that is a product or a service that is provided, if you're not adding value to that connection, then it's going to be obvious to everyone that you're being paid for very little, and so the pressure will end up being on you to be removed. I mean, it's almost like water finds crevices to get down, and that's exactly what transparency and data does. And so therefore, it's not just about cutting prices. I think where everyone sees this being about a race, I don't think that's what it is. I think what it's all about is actually demonstrating the value you add and questioning, do I actually add value for the money I am charging? Or have I been accidentally caught up in this situation where it often happens over many years, 50 years, 100 years, where you're just getting paid for old rope. And that's where, if you are being paid for old rope, that will be no longer. So you've got to understand, what do I as a business do to the consumer that adds value and that the consumer will value enough to pay me for? And so therefore, I think it's all about, the industry has to focus on the value it creates rather than the value it takes. And if they concentrate on the value it creates rather than the value you take, that compounds over time. And I think it can be summarized beautifully by saying that trust is the sum of transparency and consistent value delivery.
It's interesting you talk about data that way. We've been brought up since 2004, I suppose, when Facebook and Google and the FANGs came along. And in fact, they were using data about consumer behavior as their basic business model. They were giving away the services for free. And in return for that, we gave them all of our data. So what you're describing is actually quite a revolutionary move. Do you think it can be accomplished? And what are the implications of it for the large data-driven FANG-style operations? Does it mean they have to change their business model as well?
Yeah, I believe it does. So I would go so far to say that, the ability for any company now to have access to this level of data is going to put pressure on even some of those biggest companies. And take Google AdWords, where they derive an extreme amount of revenue from. There is an argument to be said that in the future, some of the companies that we are now enabling or talking about here, Dominic, in this section, companies with the pressure that they're under, but they actually are going to be in a position where they won't need to pay Google to advertise their wares. They'll actually be able to reach their audience themselves and be able to put products and services in front of consumers at a time when they can buy those products and services, and actually with people that are likely to buy them, because they can make the alignment themselves.
Do you see data as something which consumers use as a tool or an instrument to get better quality products and services, more personalised products and services, or is it something which has economic value in its own right? I remember reading in Jaron Lanier's book some years ago, Who Owns the Future, and he puts forward this idea of micropayments. So whenever a company makes use of your data, you actually get a micropayment. You're paid for your contribution to their marketing strategy or their revenue base. Do you see consumer data having a value in its own right? Could you sell our data?
I do. I think we're a little bit off that at the moment, but I do think it has a value. The only thing that's difficult to understand with consumers is consumer behaviour and exactly how much you will, in effect, put up with to have a free service. And I say put up with, and I give an example. So I paid last year to watch some series on ITV, 3 or 4, I can't remember which one, and I got so annoyed by the ads, I actually went online and paid $3.99 a month to get rid of the ads. But there will be other people out there who will happily sit through the ads and not pay $3.99 a month. So I guess, but what I guess I'm getting at is, as we move forward, I think there's going to be much more of I would like to pay for a premium service. And I think that we will trend that way. And I think even, dare I say it, I think there'll be some companies around that are going to have to, fight to keep, for example, Google, fight to keep hold of us, giving them their data, giving us their data for nothing so they can continue to do what they do. But actually there's going to be even pressure on, actually there'll be other companies that we're working with as consumers. And actually, I don't know about you, but I get very annoyed with Google when it wants me to do the pictures to tell them what things are. And I actually just it really annoys me. And I actually bail. So they lose whatever they're trying to sell me or whoever's trying to sell me or buy online at that point. I have been known to think I actually don't want it that much. Well, especially when you get it wrong and it says, oh, you didn't get it right, go and have another go. It's like, no, I'm not training your algorithm for you for nothing, for God's sake. So I think, as we get more savvy, we will.
But is the problem you've just described a problem like the one we have with AI, where the data isn't available in the right formats, it's not the right quality for the machines to be able to do what they're capable of doing? Do we have a problem akin to that in the world you're describing, consumers using data as a powerful tool for directing how companies behave and respond to them?
Yeah, so I have a view on that. I have a view that data is always going to be rubbish. Data by its definition has been always and will always be rubbish. And to be fair to Google, what they're trying to do is to create order out of chaos and use me to do it. And what other mechanism have they got, actually, to be honest? But I'm just not playing that game. Others will. And they'll sort the data. And actually, we at Moneyhub do the same thing. So, I've got to put my hand up and say, we will get people to categorize transactions for us, the ones that are keen to do that, and then others won't do it. But actually, you've got to be on the front foot to create chaos from data, because without order, it's very difficult to turn it into something valuable.
You said a minute ago that large companies are going to have to become more responsive to better informed consumers armed with their own data. Are we seeing at the moment that the companies or the sectors which are first encountering this challenge, banking, telecoms, energy, are we seeing those companies actually resisting consumer control of their data?
Yes, I think for different reasons. So my view, for what it's worth, is that the banks have resisted this because they feel they own the customer's data and that they, to be fair to them, need to keep it safe and look after it. But I think they've misunderstood they own my bank account, and the contract I have with them is that when I put money in that bank account, they keep it safe. But they actually don't own my spending data and what I do with my money. They don't own that, which is the data that sits slightly above the money in my bank account, right? So I think they have resisted because they've slightly misunderstood the relationship with their customer. And I think that's part of the reason with banks. With the energy companies and the others, I think it's legacy technology. I think same with, I see it on the pensions dashboard as a pensions dashboard member. The resistance from the industry isn't really because they don't believe the consumer shouldn't know more or have more transparency or visibility of their data. It's because I think they're sitting there thinking, oh my God, how are we going to do that? It's going to cost an awful lot of money and take a long time, and actually we're under pressure already to deliver what we're trying to deliver. So I think there's two elements driving it.
I can understand why the banks made that problem, but of course when you do deposit your money there, it does actually become the bank's property. Not many people know that, but that's what the law says. And you've just alluded here to a problem which is probably more extensive than we'd like to think as we move towards this consumer data-driven economy, is that a lot of the incumbents are working with out-of-date technology systems, certainly true of the banks, and I think you've just referred to the energy companies doing that. So in the UK market, for example, where you've seen a great increase in competition on the energy front, the actual process of moving from one supplier to the next is still incredibly inefficient and still very manual and paper-driven. Is that purely a systems issue, or is it deliberate retardation of the process by the incumbent energy companies?
Well, I think it's largely legacy technology. I mean, and a huge effort to change it, right, or to make it better. And to be fair, you could argue that the motivation to make it better, means that they may risk losing customers even when they make it better. So it's not exactly a win-win. They may perceive it to be a lose-lose, but I don't, they're not going to win that battle, unfortunately.
So we have these sectors: banking, telecoms, broadband, energy. Those are have been on price comparison websites for a while now. So clearly traction is occurring there. Movement is taking place. There's still room for improvement. What other sectors would you see as being next in line for this kind of slow transformational activity to take place?
Well, I think insurance is ripe for change. I think, and I think we're used to paying annual premiums, aren't we, for most things? That's kind of how it works. I think actually personalised, and maybe not personalised in the way that people think about it in terms of actually ensuring need, but definitely ensuring, for example, if I drive my car 4 times a year. At the moment, my insurance company's got no way of really knowing that apart from the mileage, which can be recorded. But making all of that a little bit more live, so more pay-as-you-go insurance. What you pay as you use the car rather than all year. And there's also some other areas. I think if you look at the car industry and the way they're embracing technology. I think, just the fact that how we drive cars, what we do with them, I think you'd be surprised at how much BMW, Audi and those companies are actually already deriving in terms of our data to further refine what they're doing with the vehicle.
It's not unrealistic to think that one day we'll have sensors on the car, and so how you're actually using the vehicle for the period of time that you're using it will start to determine the price you pay for your insurance, perhaps.
I even wonder how you drive it. I don't know if you know, but you're driving. My car tells me whether I'm economically. There's 3 levels: your uber economic, and then your normal, or your red. In effect, you're driving too hard and fast, is I guess what it's trying to tell me. And I guess you could even argue that your insurance may be relevant, even to how you're driving the car, not even just the mileage, because it's like if you're going to be in the red the whole way to Bristol, I'm going to pay for it. And if I drive it very economically, which means I'm driving it slower and more carefully, the insurance company is a lot happier with me. So I just think we are going to get into this real-time personalisation of of products and services in a way we've not been able to do before. And it's all driven off, off data.
You haven't mentioned health, which would be a fairly contentious issue. So if you drink a lot or smoke a lot or never take any physical exercise, you become a larger, higher health risk. Is that a case where the disadvantages might outweigh the advantages?
I don't you look at things like that, because I look at it that data is an enabler to make more informed decisions in everything we do. And that doesn't mean there's any right or wrong. But I think I think something that's very interesting about the health industry and the financial services industry is that the health industry has made great inroads in terms of, your 5 a day, for example, their ability to raise the awareness about how much hidden sugars we eat and things like that. If you think about all the work they've done and what they've achieved, and even the fact that we talk about prostate cancer and menopause and all the things that, just go back 10 years, and actually all of that was a bit like unheard of. And yet in the financial services industry, we've not made any progress in terms of people talking about money and what they do with it and how they make it work. So I actually think the health industry is already ahead of us.
That's an interesting observation that, if you lead an unhealthy lifestyle, it's better to know than not to know, isn't it?
Well, no, yeah, I would argue that, I genuinely, I said to my mum the other day, that because she isn't, she's not as mobile as she used to be, I made the mistake of saying that, she probably wouldn't be able to eat as many sweets as what she does. She's got such a sweet tooth. Oh, she was really indignant. She was like, I like chocolate, and she said, I don't mind if I die earlier because I keep eating chocolate. That's fine with me. And I have to say, she meant it. So yeah, this is about, this is not about a right and wrong. This is about informed choice with money, with health. I think that is what I feel quite strongly about.
Yeah. I sympathise with your mum. I have a sweet tooth as well. Now, we talked about price comparison websites a few minutes ago, and looking backwards now, they're actually an early pioneer, if you like, of this consumer data-driven economy. But if it continues to evolve in the direction that you've been describing, I would have thought it gives them something of a problem. How would you advise them to evolve their business models to take advantage of this new emerging economy?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because probably people don't realise, but the actual first version of Moneyhub was because the comparison sites made you fill out your data, all of it, many times over, and didn't store it till the next year. So when you came to do everything the next year, you had to do it all again. I mean, this is going back a few years, but it was incredibly frustrating. So actually, Moneyhub started life by actually trying to plug that gap, in terms of aggregating all your data together, so you could then, as a consumer, go, oh, okay, well, I could connect it here, and they can do, So, so I think really the power of the comparison sites is, I would argue that you want them to become almost the auctioneers of what you want as a consumer. So, can I place my mortgage with a comparison site, and they will literally manage the auctioning of my mortgage, and it could be each day. My mortgage is with a different product owner, right? I mean, genuinely, we've not thought of it like that, but I honestly do not mind who provides my mortgage, so long as, it's not getting dearer every day. It's like it's at my rate or better. And actually, maybe, we talk about in Moneyhub, we do the loan to value ratio nudge, so that you can, in effect, take advantage of mortgages quicker and sooner. For most people, it's a quick way to get some money back in your pocket. But actually, a comparison site could just make that automatic.
Yes, but if and you mentioned a minute ago that Moneyhub was invented to solve that data storage problem. There were probably many reasons why the early insurers didn't store people's data, but the cost of storage was probably an inhibitor before the cloud came along. Now, storage is relatively cheap, but if you are to start receiving real-time mortgage products or real-time savings products or real-time insurance products which adjust continuously, somebody is going to have to, or the organisation supplying that service is going to have to hold your data permanently. You're going to have to share with them an awful lot of details about your life. And some of the early apps which are coming to market now are finding that's an issue with people. People don't feel that comfortable about handing over their life story in the form of data to a third-party organisation. Are they right to feel concerned about the security of their data or not?
So I would probably answer that in two ways. One, I push back a little bit on the discomfort of people sharing data, because otherwise Facebook wouldn't be making billions of pounds a year. Yeah. So I think, you know, if you think about what people share on Facebook, I mean, I've got to put my hand up. I don't have a Facebook account. But, you know, so it's just something that I've managed so far not to have. And now with my friends, I've become such a, anomaly. I quite like being the anomaly. So I'm very annoying to my group of friends. But, you know, I'm staggered at what people will put on there, you know, in terms of, you know, their children's photos and names and all sorts of things that, you know, you think if you really were worried about sharing your data, I can't imagine why you'd be doing all of that. But so I don't really believe that's true. People don't understand the value exchange. So what Facebook have got absolutely right is the value exchange in terms for putting all of those, you know, for putting that data up. There's a very clear value. So I think what we haven't seen yet is financial services making all the comparison sites, making the value exchange strong enough so that people will do that. But, you know, if the only way is to have the best mortgage every day is by actually connecting up your, you know, whole financial life to this site to allow them to do that, I think it might be transformational what we see. But we, unfortunately, like you just mentioned earlier, Dominic, it's actually still quite clunky to change providers. So you can connect all your data up, but to go from one provider to the other is still not necessarily a great experience. So I think it's getting that end-to-end experience right. And then from that, we will get much more uptake.
You're right about clunky. I've just been in the process of changing my telecoms and energy suppliers, and it was an incredibly old-fashioned analog process, no matter how much technology these companies try to deploy.
And the same with changing mortgage providers. You know, you talk to anyone that they start sometimes with a very slick front process and then quickly fall off a cliff.
Yes. Yeah, the mortgage is lucky you don't take those out very often. Maybe, you know, with technology we will start to take them out more often. But the clunkiness of the process prevents it. And now you mentioned Facebook and people put the most extraordinary things up there. And I've known companies who look at the Facebook profiles of people who apply to work there to find out whether they have the right sort of character, which is, in one sense, a worrying development. But it's quite a good segue into asking what other forms of data are we expecting this consumer data-driven economy to start looking at? Are people's mobile telephones already part of the mix, for example? Are there other data sets which could be taken into account? And what's the control the consumer has over that? Can they choose or not choose what data A is looked at and what data is made available to service providers or employers?
Well, I think at the moment it's quite tricky. I mean, you know, I'm sure Samsung know what time I go to bed and what time I get up, and I'm sure, you know, I think they can work that out, right? I mean, and I don't think I do get the choice to not share that with them if I want to have their phone and the alarm on and this, you know, that comes back to that value exchange again, doesn't it? And so I don't think we do always have choice, and this is where I circle back to. At some point, there will be premium services that do charge, and some of us will pay because actually we want to be in much more control of that data, right? But at the moment, you know, it's like the Wild West, is from what I can work out. I mean, you know, I can't pay for Google Maps, but I actually can't get around London without it. So, you know, I have that, that seesaw relationship where I don't really want to share everything with Google, but I give in and share everything with Google because I want to get around London easily. But if Google suddenly said, well, we will charge you £30 a year, Sam, to have Google Maps, but, you know, we'll anonymize, you know, we won't use your data, I'll be like, great, that sounds good to me. But
now, looking back to the pioneers of the internet, which have led to apps like Google Maps and Waze and City Mapper, for example, which we all use to move around, and we're giving a third party lots of information about where we're going, what we're up to, which they can then monetize. Does the mistake I was about to refer to, the pioneers making, was they didn't insist on people disclosing their identities. They realized in the old joke, you didn't know it was your dog reading your ad on the internet. But looking back from where we are now, we can see actually having digital identities would have been a way of circumventing the problem we now have, where we're creating all this data but have no ownership rights in it. We're not asked our permission when it's used. So, and I'm about to ask you a couple of questions about regulation as well, but would digital identities help to mitigate that issue?
Well, I mean, of course, the industry would love to have a digital ID, because obviously it would definitely help. But the technologist in me loves the idea of a digital ID, don't get me wrong, but obviously the human aspect of it and watching, what can go wrong, does also make me mindful of the power that brings. And I guess what I would say in this is that I do think it's possible that where we look to in other different models in terms of the blockchain model, where you're looking at the democratization of validation, we haven't seen that really find its feet yet. I mean, it's in very early days, and people are quite fearful of it. But ironically, it's the exact opposite, because what it does do is it means that actually you can have your ID validated, by a blockchain, and actually you don't need. So therefore, you don't need a digital ID that is held in one place, which puts a number on my head and stamps on my forehead, because it's done through a different mode of operation. So I didn't really answer your question.
You did answer it. You were describing a digital identity made up of data, but you continue to own that data. You own that ID, and you make available what parts of that ID you want that particular organisation to see in order to do business with them.
Yeah.
It's a democratic digital ID rather than one controlled by governments.
Exactly. So I would obviously, by nature, will always prefer the non-government regular, because that's just how I am. But I do understand why the world does want these digital IDs.
Now, you mentioned a while ago that the data universe at the moment is like the Wild West out there. Does that mean it needs to be regulated? And if so, what would the ideal open data regulation look like?
I think what needs to be regulated is what we're already seeing in terms of the law around data, more than a regulated body. I don't think that's the answer, because it never really works. It certainly won't work worldwide. But I think around things like, I think we're very fortunate with GDPR to have regulation like that coming in, and it getting tougher, if you like, rather than easier. So, the ability, so in a way, legislating how data can be used is really, to me, the way forward, rather than a world body that's going to try and tell the world what to do in terms of data. I can't see that working.
But it's hard to remember this during the pandemic, that we do live in an increasingly global, interconnected world, and people travel a lot. It would actually be quite handy if you were able to use your data across borders. And in order for that to happen, we would presumably need some kind of international agreement on standards, rules, if you like, of how data could be exchanged, what data could be exchanged, and what counted in one jurisdiction could also count in another jurisdiction for the same purpose. So can we get away without having an international body to coordinate the data standards on a global scale? Do we need it or don't we?
It's not really my area of expertise, but I watch the inability of, and the pushback that you get. I mean, you've only got to look at Brexit and the EU. Part of that was because there was a body operating across a number of countries, and that didn't work very well, did it? So I can't see it work. I can't see people genuinely, even if some of us sign up for that, they just seem to unravel. I mean, even look at the World Health Organization and what's happening there. I mean, in theory, what you're saying about the pandemic, it should have brought them into their forefront. Every country should have wanted to pour money in, and the US is pulling out. It's like, honestly. So I think you've just got to accept, like we have to do in finance with behavioural economics, that the minute you throw people in the mix, you throw these, genuinely illogical modes of operation. And so I think you almost have to think of a way of achieving the results, but without relying on that, I would say, fairly, potentially ineffective and fraught, kind of body, if you like. So I'd rather see, for example, if I share my data with, I don't know, I'm going to make this up, but a Saudi Arabian bank, that I just need to understand that it doesn't get covered by this legislation. They can store your data anywhere and do it. The same with China. We all know if your data makes its way back to China, they can do what they like with it. There are no rules to stop anything happening with your data in China. So you make that decision then. But going back to my earlier point about the law around the transparency of where your data is going, so that you can then decide what apps to use or what services and at what risk. I think that's what we can achieve.
So change is hard. The world isn't unfolding in quite the way we would like it to. Moneyhub is 10 years old now, I think I'm right to say. And
2014.
Okay, well, I think it was 2011, forgive me. But okay, well, you've been at this for some years now. My final question to you is, are you more optimistic now about open data than you were when you started in 2014?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, in 2014, F-Data was created really by Gavin Littlejohn and Dave Tong, and the reason it was created, I don't know if any people will know this, but they both happened to bank with the same bank and got sent a letter telling them to stop screen scraping their bank accounts, and or legal action would be taken. And that was what galvanized them into action, to think that it's my data that I'm trying to use for good reason with other, things like comparison sites to make my life easier. And so that's actually what kicked it off. So I imagine if you think about that is how we were in 2014 to where we are today, that's an incredible shift.
Sam Seaton, CEO of Moneyhub, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a very interesting discussion. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.